Hello and welcome. When hearing of the practice of impressment, the violent abduction of civilians into naval or army service, you'd be forgiven for thinking this criminal kidnapping died out in the 19th century. Tragically, press gangs are very much alive and well in Ukraine, where they're enthusiastically supported by Australia's unconscionably inhumane Prime Minister Snake Oil Albo. There's abundant documented and video evidence of Ukrainian military thugs forcibly abducting desperately resisting victims to be cannon fodder for a miserably failed proxy war. I'm unsure of the amount of public money, but I understand that $960 million has been undemocratically donated to the doomed Ukrainian war catastrophe. In lockstep with Australia's community majority, I remain fiercely opposed to the egregious misuse of already hard-pressed financial resources. Even more so, since these violent press gangs are running rampant in their kidnapping crime spree funded by Australian tax dollars, while war criminal Zelensky builds a personal portfolio of multi-million-dollar mansions in luxurious locations around the world. Impressment is generally remembered as a controversial method of naval recruitment used primarily by the British Royal Navy from the 16th to the early 19th centuries. It involved forcibly enlisting able-bodied men into naval service through brutal coercion or physical capture. Press gangs freely operated in coastal towns and cities, targeting able-bodied men between the ages of 18 and 55. They had the self-bestowed legal authority, just as with Zelensky's thugs, to seize men and force them into service. Gangs would typically raid taverns, lodging houses, and other areas where potential recruits might be found. In Ukraine, these vile predators stealthily patrol town and city streets to pounce without warning upon innocent victims, including women. Impressment proved deeply unpopular throughout history and, as now, often met with fierce resistance, albeit with today's occurrences largely futile when up against heavily armed, socio-psychopathic army brutes. History records numerous instances of riots and violent confrontations between press gangs and local communities. In 1803, for example, a press gang in South Shields, England, was attacked and overwhelmed by an angry crowd armed with stones and brickbats. In another well-known incident, Irish haymakers armed with sickles and pitchforks roundly defeated a press gang in Barking. Despite its widespread use, impressment was a highly contentious issue even in its time, but incredulously its routine occurrence now in Ukraine is callously ignored by Australian politicians and mainstream media, despite being the worst imaginable violation of civil and human rights. Being kidnapped and sent to the Ukraine war front is a certain death sentence. Thomas Trotter, writing in the 1790s, described the press gang as revolting to the feelings of a Briton and detested its gross violation of personal security. It's important to note that historical resistance to impressment wasn't limited to violent confrontations. Local officials often obstructed press gangs through non-violent means, such as refusing to support their warrants or turning a blind eye to conscription evaders. The widespread opposition of the day reflected the intense unpopularity of press gangs. In Ukraine, growing community resistance has emerged through the night attacks of setting fire to vehicles known to be used by press gangs. As an aside, I should mention that the reason fracking never got a toehold in France was because the resistors also set fire to all vehicles associated with the known ecocide. The low-life frackers just packed up and left to never return. I can also report outstanding successes from the UK's Blade Runner teams continually destroying ULEZ cameras at a rate faster than the criminal government can replenish. Back to the topic at hand. Europe's impressment system began to decline in the early 19th century, but unbelievably has suddenly resurfaced in a desperate measure to prop up Ukraine's unwinnable conflict. It's an open secret that Ukraine has woefully insufficient troops to mount any effective defence, let alone attempt a futile attack that Russia's weaponised drones would instantly annihilate. Like all morally sound individuals, I am incandescently outraged that Australian public money should be used in the commission of these genocidal crimes against humanity. It's estimated Ukraine has suffered up to 500,000 dead in a proxy conflict that had no hope of ever being remotely successful. Every independent news channel accurately predicted its unavoidable military failure, but in sadistic disregard of this inevitability, the wanton carnage was enthusiastically championed by the satanic ghouls of mainstream media and their globalist cohorts. This manufactured theatre of war is bad enough within itself, but it's only a small part of the wider spiritual war on humanity that encompasses myriad battlefronts on multiple levels. An unseen and little-known aspect of this escalating warfare is the rampant child stealing by family courts via kidnapping of perfectly safe and healthy children under the pretext of protecting them from non-existent threats. This transnational human trafficking racket operates across all borders, wherein Satan-serving bureaucrats ensure aggrieved and wrongly persecuted parents are cruelly ripped apart from their children under false allegations. Often, parents who've lost children to government-sponsored child sex trafficking through this rotten-to-the-core system are wrongly imprisoned themselves for attempting to obtain some measure of fairness. Sadly, fairness and justice no longer exist in our irredeemably corrupted judiciary and nauseatingly debauched justice system. As with the aforementioned unsanctioned public money funding Ukraine's illegal war and its ongoing crimes against humanity, no actions emanating from Snake Oil Albo's government have community approval. On the contrary, the overwhelming majority vehemently oppose his wasteful extravagance and anti-human actions that are unfailingly against the interests of the people. An example in point is the unsought and ferociously resisted closing of post offices. The Australian public not only demands that working post offices continue providing their current essential services, but are significantly improved by the adding of a national post office bank. Snake Oil Albo and his slithering associate serpents are well aware of Australia's burgeoning resistance to UN-orchestrated tyranny, but no amount of awareness will impede or divert their evil quest to crush the electorate beneath the jackboots of Agenda 2030. Every country suffocating under globalism endures continuously damaging attacks through the democidal treason of its own leaders. They wage endless war upon us via every dystopic apparatus available, and after centuries of planning for this pivotal endgame, the clear and present danger of that weighty arsenal cannot be underestimated. Its venomous tentacles snake into every aspect of daily life to control all regulatory, health, judicial and civic agencies, directing, coordinating unrestricted medical fascism across the board. New Zealand's captured government just tightened its crushing grip on what remains of the free world via its treasonous connivance for the WHO's pandemic preparedness fraud. Ostensibly, New Zealand's stated goal in this insidious conspiracy seeks international rules strengthening the ability of international institutions to prevent and mitigate future threats. right. This blatantly facilitates another fake medical emergency that will rapidly advance genocide by neurotoxic mRNA injection. They use the fear-mongering doublespeak of supporting pandemic prevention preparedness and response systems to enforce the WHO's updated and universally resisted pandemic treaty. Once ratified, unelected bureaucrats will unlawfully and unconstitutionally direct captured governments to identify and control the falsely reported spread of fictitious diseases in a carbon copy of the genocidal COVID scam. Different language and new threat ID are the only changes. But when attacking us a second time around, the threat is significantly amplified and measurably more consequential. This report should not be dismissed as fear-mongering alarmism. It's an honest update of a perilous situation. And thank you for watching.